Hi, everybody, and welcome to Precog Time Conversation, our Precog Time Conversation with Michael Stamm, who's an amazing painter, and we're really lucky to be here talking with him. Michael was in issue 3 of the magazine. In addition to being a great painter, he's also a great writer and thinker, interviewing the artist Iman Rad. And we're also really lucky to be talking with Michael because he has a show of paintings up right now at the Shulamit Nazarian Gallery in LA up until March 6th called So Super Sorry, Sir. And so I think with that, we'll just jump in and get talking with you about what you're thinking about your paintings. But our first question for everyone is, how have you been during the pandemic? What have you been doing?
Well, I live, as I said, I live about 5 blocks from my studio. So I have been walking to my studio in the morning and working and then coming back at home and watching TV. And I've been sort of like hibernating like everyone else, but I have had the show to work on. So I've just been sort of doing the same thing, that I usually do, which is not seeing people and working obsessively. And I also started dating someone like right at the beginning of the pandemic, and that intensified our relationship quite quickly. So I sort of nested, worked, and then, tried to work out at my house and failed like everyone else. So my lifestyle hasn't changed that much, other than being horrified and scared of things that are happening outside of my control.
Great.
Which is sort of actually not a change in my lifestyle, actually.
I was going to be like, yeah, your work is already has a lot of sort of like a darkness or a kind of dark approach to the ways that we cope in normal life. And so I was also wondering whether whether the pandemic kind of had affected anything thematically in terms of how you developed your current body of work.
No, not really. I kind of had the same reaction to the pandemic. This may be like represent incredible amount of privilege, but I had the same reaction to the pandemic that I had to Donald Trump losing, which was, when you're depressed, bad news doesn't traumatize you as much as confirm your worldview. I think I reacted, so like the catastrophe and cataclysm of the pandemic sort of materialized anxieties that I already had about the world being like a really scary and dangerous place. Actually, I'm really overemphasizing it. I was afraid, but I was, it didn't change my work that much. I don't know. I don't think my work is actually really flexible in terms of adapting to like world events. And that's something I'd like to change. So I sort of was on a track and I continued on with it. But I'm hoping in the future that I can be like a little bit more attentive to the present on like a more granular level.
So that sort of sets us up well for a good sort of introductory or first question to ask you, which is, what is your process in developing, especially bodies of work? You tend to work in, at least as far as I've seen shows of your work, they kind of tend to have a thematic arc and a sort of enclosed sort of narrative thematic, let's say. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you develop bodies of work and how you came about this process.
Well, they usually begin with sort of a guiding concept, which can come any way. My last body of work in 2018 came from a comment that I had in one comment I had from a studio visit, just about like what your therapist wore as a way of communicating their sort of intentions. And someone just said that, I thought it was so funny and like quirky that it became sort of the entire concept of the show. And for this show, I was just making collages out of stained glass, and I found these like stained glass images of the devil, and I kind of collaged them into this like tantrumy devil character. And I just thought it would be, I don't actually have no idea why, but I just thought it would be funny to show the devil's butthole. I think that it just seemed like perverted and cheeky. And then that image really, I thought was compelling. And that sort of became the guiding image of the show, which was this devil that was malleable, and meant to not just be evil, but also be like a vessel for other bad qualities, but like adventurously bad qualities. Or I said it like a picaresque hero, like to me, he's the hero. Like he's a hero with a lot of unlikable characteristics. He's like anti-hero, I guess, is that what it is? So I started thinking about, at one point I was thinking about like what an anti-hero would think and feel, which generated most of the devil paintings. And then simultaneously, I also was making these hand paintings, which sort of came from just a picture I took of like, I actually don't really remember how the hand paintings came about, but I just took a picture of my hand making like a little finger, and then I was like, oh, this could be a painting. This looks like a human figure being existential. So that just sort of became a sort of side project for the devil paintings that eventually I thought everything worked well together. And the title of the show, So Super Sorry Sir, came from one painting that's in the body, it's the one right there. And that, I thought that encapsulated the body of work well, in that everything was sort of about penitence and like how you react to bad feelings, and how you and also like having an ironic or sort of flippant relationship to apologizing. So yeah, the body of work came, a lot of the images sort of informed one another. Like I painted the devil butthole painting, and if you actually look at this painting, you can see the heart in the middle is actually the devil with a butthole getting stabbed by the sword, and it's the same devil. It's like a kind of like junior version of the devil, of the more realistic devil paintings. So some of the motifs, I would do one and I would sort of work on the other, and I would bring images in and out of one another, or motifs. And that's sort of, it all happened at the same time. Like all the paintings are worked on at the same time. So when you reach like a block in one, you can sort of work on another. And then in that one, you can inadvertently think of a strategy for the new one or for the old one. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
And do you sketch these out on Photoshop? Because there's a lot of like, photographic like imagery, like collage kind of looking things, but they're all painted,
Yeah, I work a lot. I'll sort of start in like right now, for example, this is what I'm painting. You can't really see. I'm like just painting. I'm wanting to do a painting of people falling. And so I just started with like this really general image of just to like kind of feel out the composition of the painting. And then I took a picture of that and brought it into Photoshop, and then sort of turned it into turned it into all of these permutations of, I know you can't really even see it, but like all these permutations of that image. Or like, and then taking one and like making it fall. So I work a lot. Photoshop is sort of, I like to move in and out of Photoshop, and because one, I think if you are using Photoshop as a primary sort of like mode of creating your painting, then your paintings have like a kind of dated look. There's a certain kind of Photoshop painting that I think is very aughts. And then I like also, if you move in and out of Photoshop, you kind of erase your trail, because you can create like the analog sort of quality of painting and the digital quality of Photoshop can sort of mix in a way that makes them hard to distinguish from one another, and will make like a painting, for example, seem like really exact. Yeah, I always want to bring the Photoshop images into the painting in a way that prioritizes the painting, rather than, I'm not interested in like the drama of Photoshop in painting. I always want to like have the painting subsume the Photoshop.
It's interesting though, also because Photoshop, Photoshop is a very flat. It's sort of it's a vehicle which emphasizes layers as flat layers. And one of the things which I think is interesting about your painting, which is that even when you're representing space, there's a kind of theatrical or scenic quality to the space. And actually also many of your compositions are very frontal in terms of how you're organizing information and how you lay information on a plane. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that kind of stacking and this kind of relationship to the surface, which is which has a sort of frontal and sometimes decorative quality in terms of how you're including symbols, flowers, and motifs.
Okay. Well, I think that no, there's like 3 different questions in there, and I think they're all no, it's fine. They're all unified, I think, by my interest, and this has been something that I've been interested in for a while. If you go to the website, I can show you. If you go to 2015 in the website, like I've always been interested in the artifice of emotion and like the artifice of performance of emotion. And so I think that sort of like trifurcates or whatever into 3 qualities. One is like a frontality of so that makes it more like a tableau than a realistic scene, which I think if that staginess like really foregrounds, it really foregrounds like that the painting is supposed to be theatrical and allegorical rather than realistic, so that you're supposed to like kind of take a meaning away from it rather than experience it, and maybe sometimes even take like a didactic meaning from it. So that is one of the reasons why the flatness also, in my mind, the flatness, the way I've like post facto rationalized it, I think on one hand, I just like the flatness because it kind of creates a generic energy in which you can incorporate a lot of different things into the canvas, into the painting, like if they're all sort of flattened and generic. But in my mind, the flatness is also, I think that there are some affect theorist that I read at some point talked about like postmodernity and like capitalism as an era of like flattened affect, which I agree. Like, you know, I think the way we experience feelings has become like very strange and estranged to us. And another thing I think, you know, that is talked about is the loss of aura in the, you know, in the age of like the image. You know, obviously aura as a concept is like, it's not a real thing, but it is, I think, something that people still sort of, I think it's something that, I mean, it's fake, but we've lost it even more in like contemporary sort of image world as image. And so I think one of the another way, I think, you know, I'm like been very influenced by computers, computer games, and just being like a online person. I think you experience a world that's guided by interfaces and text, more so than like experiences. So I think a flattened sort of aesthetic is the most accurate way of depicting like contemporary, like sort of like subjectivity. So I think a lot about like a period eye, you know, like Michael Baxendale. And to me, it's like a period eye would be seeing like menus and buttons and like, you know, and would be much more like conversant with graphic design or like interface design than I think it would be like a realistic 3-dimensional space that's supposed to represent real life. So I think that flatness is, you know, it corresponds to how I see the world, like that sort of like the interface of affect that is being alive right now and being addicted to your phone. So that's my response to flatness. And then you also talked about theatricality, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna just sort of to follow up and flesh out this question of flatness, because it seems, you know, it's like obviously all these things are interwoven, but it seems really relevant the way that you're talking about for instance, the way that you're talking about loss of aura inside of digital photographs also seems to interface and interact with like our expectations that everything feel great all the time, right? We have a simultaneous sort of loss of this kind of unique relationship to the image, or this sort of uniquely emotional, transcendent, sublime, whatever, right? Relationship to a particular handcrafted image in the case of, you know, whatever, like the theory of aura or whatever. And then simultaneously, like in contemporary image relationship, we like have this expectation that to like get to have that experience anyway, just on Instagram, right? So you have the desire for an experience which is unique or which is sublime or which is somehow ecstatic, which is sort of flattened and like processed into these scrolling, this kind of scrolling phone life. And that also seems to relate to this question of theatricality and performance. Is that on base?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's tragic in a way. It's tragicomic, you know? I think that like this, I don't want to say like this loss of aura, you know, obviously that's a really problematic like concept because it's sort of like a nostalgia for something that in itself was a construct. But I do think like, I do think there is like a sort of, there's a degradation of our experience of reality, like in a way that seems healthy. And I think that is proven by like rising, you know, rates of mental illness. And, you know, I do think that if we may not be losing aura, but I think we're losing sanity and touch with reality. You know, we're losing, so whatever it is that we're losing is not, I think I would like to see reclaimed. And I do think that like there is, you know, you talked about wellness and self-help a little bit and happiness. And I think we've sort of had a misplaced relationship with that, where we've been really obsessed with like analog things in our house, like lifestyle as a way to sort of like replace the aura with, you know, like nice products. So I also think that the flatness of my paintings and sort of and in particular, like the therapist and tincture paintings, like the sort of, that was a way of kind of showing how our attempt to like reclaim aura was like so structured and mediated by like itemization. So, but it's less so in my newer work. I've, you know, that sort of is, that painting I think that you just flipped away from is like the first painting, like the seminal painting. In terms of like artifice of feeling. I like that painting. But yeah, so I sort of I went on a bit of a tangent.
No, but I see it's like, I think that the obvious, like in your work, the relationship, I thought about your work and the relationship between artifice and theatricality sort of inside of the mode of like, there's something, anyway, that's sort of a different conversation that I'm not going to go down. I know I sort of indicated it, but I think there's a relationship between artifice and theatricality, and in terms of the performance of emotion, right? The idea that we have to let people know that we're feeling something in order for that feeling to be validated or communicated, which seems sort of implicit inside of a phrase like "so super sorry, sir," for instance, right? Outside of the different implications of like social implications of apologizing, you know, which is especially gendered in many ways, right? But also, yeah.
This painting that you're clicking on, isn't it a privilege to know exactly what you're feeling? This is sort of, that's the question. Like that's sort of the question of my entire body of work, is a little bit like the trials of having like an integrated self, you know? So, yeah, so theatricality and wellness and authenticity are sort of those are sort of the things that I'm questioning in my work. And I think those are important, you know, they correspond to painting, because painting, I think people sort of fetishize for being analog, you know, such an analog medium. And so I think the distortion of the analog qualities of painting, you know, by flattening it, by bringing it into the Photoshop, by this painting, for example, using 3D modeling software to create like the auratic movement of like the sun across the sky, that to me is a way of simulating like the loss of affect, or the, you know, it's a way of simulating like the constructs, like our mistaken constructs we have about painting's ability to represent reality. And in doing so to create like a real feeling. But some people actually experience real feelings when they see paintings, you know, like people are always like, oh, I cried in front of the Mark Rothko paintings. And when people say that, I'm like, I just am I am not judging them, but I do not understand them. I don't understand like how a painting could make you cry, but I respect that reaction. And then perhaps I think I'm actually envious of it. But to me, a painting doesn't make me cry, it makes me think, you know, and those two things are obviously can happen at the same time. But that conflict, I think I would like to be able to cry in front of a painting, but I think my failure to do so is something that I want to like reflect in my work, is like the way it's like an aspiration towards real feeling that's so mediated, which is why I think there's a prevalence of grids, like emotions being sort of constructed and ordered by grids, and bottles, for example, you know, like there's a lot of like processes by which this painting, for example, was supposed to be like, this painting is belladonna and haberandi. So belladonna is a poison and haberandi is the antidote for it. And so I wanted them like in equal amounts. And I wanted them to be congruent. Like you could like move there. So if you look at them, you could kind of like move the red lines over and it would completely overlap the like the belladonna, you know, berries. And I like the idea. And so this painting was sort of about like a potion that you could drink that would neither kill you nor cure you. I also like the idea of the shutters being closed in like the death side and open in the life side. And I also thought it was kind of like on the left side with the flower, it was like your eye was closed. On the right side with the shutters open and the flower being open, it was like your eye was open. So this painting was like about fluttering between life and death. And it was sort of like, and I also thought for a while I was making like these suicide potions. So this is supposed to be like in my mind, this was like a cry for help potion, like where you drank it because you wanted attention, but you didn't want to die. You want it, and so that's sort of what, so, you know, in that way, like I kind of really distorted a feeling that I have. In some respects, I like sort of computerized it and digitized it and like laid it out in a really geometric way. And that's how I know how to express it. I don't know how to express it any other way than sort of as an interface, you know, or like a video game. But so those are sort of the way I've been thinking about paintings. And the newer ones are much more a narrative and I'm kind of trying to figure out how to actually balance the theatricality and sort of narrative qualities of the hand paintings and the suicide painting with the older, more like schematic paintings, because I think they're both cool in their own way.
I was just thinking about how, so I didn't know that you were influenced by Picaresque novels, but one of the things which is interesting about them, especially at their outset, right? Like they're, like the first Picaresque novel emerged like in Spain, in 16th century Spain under the Inquisition, Lazarillo de Tormes, which, you know, just happens to be something I studied, but whatever. Anyway, but like, I think in those, one of the things which is interesting about the Picaresque novel is that it's not necessarily a traditional anti-hero setup. And obviously like the relationship to class and social structure is really outlined in terms of how you follow sort of a character who in some ways has like maybe street smarts, but also doesn't necessarily have institutional knowledge of situations around them. So the pitfalls that they encounter end up describing a system of oppression or a system of violence or, you know, whatever, in ways that allow for that system to be both described and then also kind of subtextually criticized. And I was thinking about that just now in relationship to the work and the figure of the devil and So Super Sorry Sir, and wondering whether and how the character, thinking about the character of the devil as a picaresque figure might relate to your understanding of queer history and maybe some of the institutional trappings of society and that history.
Yes. Well, firstly, your knowledge of the picaresque hero is much more extensive than mine, and I appreciate. So I'm going to clarify. And I mostly thought of the picaresque hero as like someone that was like likable, but so I thought it was like someone that was a hero that was likable, but kind of like plucky and like what's the word I'm looking for? Like yeah, a hero that like that wasn't like not a lawful, like a person that was like a hero that was likable despite being unlawful. You know what I mean? So I so I extracted a lot from that. I was more thinking of the devil as like a character that wasn't conventionally good, but had, and then in being so, was likable and redeemed, perhaps. And so I guess for me, like the queer figure, I think, so this gets to like a more complex and I think personal feeling I have about my work, which is like how I'm like supposed to sort of, how I'm supposed to sort of create myself as like a moral queer person, and how so sorry, I took some notes about this question because I wanted to be able to like speak about it in a clear way and in a thoughtful way, and in a way that was inclusive to all different types of queerness. So I do like, to my experience of queerness was like not necessarily one of like sexual exclusion, because I grew up in a progressive environment and had open-minded progressive parents who are watching right now. So thank you to you both. But I did experience it much more as like an iconoclasm and like a constant feeling of like being subjected to powers that were trying to like mold me, and hating them, and always wanting to like reject those powers that were trying to turn me into something. And it wasn't always like trying to turn me straight, but it was more like trying to turn me normal. It was also often, it wasn't just trying to turn me normal, but it was trying to turn me normal in a way of like making me good. And so I went to a school where we got graded on attitude and effort. And I always fucking hated that, excuse my language. I really hated it. And so I think like my experience of like the drama of like whether or not I'm good has really influenced my relationship to wanting to depict like morality as sort of a complex thing, and also like being immoral as like a really rich and complex, you know, category. And obviously there's centuries and millennia of thinkers who question the idea of morality and the hegemony of morality. But for me, I guess queerness is a little bit, it's like, it's not just like having abnormal sexual, it's not just having sorry, I'm real sort of like trying to figure out how to answer this question. I mean, I think I'm answering it. The devil, I like the devil because the devil is bad, and I identify with the bad subject. So in like painting the devil being bad in a way that people like, whether or not that's like painting a painting that people like, I think that in general, if you paint a painting that people enjoy looking at, you are redeeming the subject. Even if you're not showing the subject doing something good, you are honoring the subject by commanding people's attention. So for me, like by painting the devil in like a morally complex environment, or a way where you like him for being bad, or where you like pity him, in my mind, the devil in these paintings, the devil's male, obviously, he like, or has male, you know, has a penis. So is either, you know, whether is assigned male at birth, and in my world it identifies as male. But and that's also consistent with the villain that we have in society, which is like the cisgender man, for good reason. And yeah, did I answer that clearly?
I mean, it's fast. I think it's really fascinating to hear you talk about like this kind of the moral structure of the world that you're encountering. And also, I think in the devil paintings, Flo and I were talking about, and Kelly, as we were developing these questions, like how the devil paintings have this kind of you know, like they are very theatrical, right? But they also have this kind of element of a sort of torture, right? Like the devil's being tortured. but also maybe
Yeah.
tortured for encountering something that they didn't inherently know was wrong beforehand. Wait,
or enjoying the torture. I think
Yeah.
that's like what you see. Like, so yeah, we wanted to ask you about sadomasochism because I feel like in this new work, there's a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, sure. Well, and let me know if I'm freezing up, because everyone here is freezing up a little bit, but let's keep on going. So I thought a lot about that, and you know, I think like Judeo-Christian religions love masochism, and they love sadomasochism, obviously. And I think I do think so. I sort of think of Christianity as a religion that like externalizes pain, and like the serving of pain as like a moral instrument, and in Judaism as a religion where like in the internalization of pain, like you like do it to yourself as a way of like connecting the morality. So I do think yeah, subjecting the devil to pain is a way, I think, of self-flagellating, but it's performing self-flagellating in a way that's supposed to be satirical, you know. So in that way, the sadomasochism is mostly performed as a way of satirizing, like, and undermining the seriousness of like the way we like morally label people, or more like measure morality. It's not necessarily supposed to be like kinky or it's mostly, you know, I do think, you know, I also think pain is just naturally connected to trauma. And I think, you know, as far as I've read it, I don't remember who said it. I think maybe it was like Kathy Caruth, and through Freud, that trauma itself, you know, is a repetitive application of pain that connects to the original like traumatic event. You know, like trauma arises cyclically, or, you know, over and over. So I do think maybe it's not sadomasochism, but self-flagellation is also a way of experiencing trauma. And I think maybe the characters in the paintings aren't necessarily repeating this, like self-flagellating over and over, but I think myself, I am painting figures being punished and in pain over and over. And I think that is a way, you know, for me, like, it's not just always like, oh, I'm expressing my traumatic history. It's also, I'm like kind of trying to deconstruct the way that people express trauma and illustrate it, you know, because I do think, in the same way that we talked about affect being and theatricality being artificial, I do think, you know, the overuse of trauma has, as like a current, you know, buzzword, I think should force us to like be extremely rigorous about like how we see trauma, you know, like is trauma, I think we think trauma right now is like, trauma is sort of the new aura. And so in terms of self-flagellation and sadomasochism, I think I connect it more to like to understanding trauma than necessarily like an interest in sadomasochism, and pain as a way of like managing internalize the internal sort of expression of trauma.
So
Does
that's
that make any sense?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, you know, it's like the one in the new body of work, the one sort of depiction of, even though it's also performative, right? The one sort of depiction of self-flagellation, which is in fact self-immolation, right? Is that small background portrait of the self-immolation of David Buckle. And that seems sort of like, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the contrast between these kind of repeated symbols, right? The way that the relationship between affect, the performativity of emotion, et cetera, functions as theater in this particular economy that you're describing. And how that relates to like specifically historical instances, and also like political performances that are intended to have quite different effects, and also much greater risk to the body.
Well, I guess that to me, that painting is important to me because it's actually the only painting that I've made in a while that I don't really think is sort of satirical or ironic. I take it really seriously. And on one hand, I think like what interested me about that story, just beyond being compelled by it and saddened by it, was that this figure really took, like, we talk about like political accountability and owning your role in oppression. And I think he took that to like the absolute level, which is committed, dying by suicide. And so I thought like that was sort of the most extreme version of, I guess, like paying for the sins of the world, and I was interested in that, and almost like self-martyrdom, like to me, there was something, I mean, I don't want to like, I feel on one hand, I feel a little guilty sort of like allegorizing this person's death, but I did do so. And so I did think there was something like self-martyring about this act. It like seemed like the ultimate moral act to me. And in that way, I guess that was like, I think like the most extreme realization of this like like way of expressing conscientiousness and like how it can make you feel bad. And in that way, I think it was like, I think in that way, this painting sort of pushed me beyond a satirical or ironic way of distancing myself from these painful feelings. I like really connected deeply emotionally to this figure and like have an incredible amount of respect and reverence, not for him for dying by suicide, but for something that happened that went beyond performance, like this almost, it went beyond the performance and like theory of virtue and just became, and that is, and it's really sad, but it's also absolute. And yeah, I was really, I found this to be a really compelling, sad event, and I wanted to paint it. And in this painting, for example, I put the queer figures in front, having sort of like a queer moment of intimacy, like a domestic moment, which I think a lot of people have theorized that, that love, like queer love is a political act. And I don't necessarily think that like gay bourgeois love at this point is stigmatized enough or obscene enough to like really constitute a political act. So I guess I wanted to sort of use, and this I don't feel great about. I have a lot of like misgivings about this painting. I wanted to like contrast the absolute political act with almost like an act that people like really try to describe as political, and that, so in that way, it sort of challenged, it challenged performance. This is like the end of performance, this painting. And that's my summation.
Go ahead, Flo. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, when do you wanna take questions, Gabby?
There are no questions currently in the chat, so if any of y'all have any of those, please drop them in, and I'll ask them as they come up. Michael, I was gonna ask you, in the new body of work, there are a number of paintings where the body has become abstracted or collaged, and those paintings are also named after particular drugs, which are also often used in mental health care.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, and so I was wondering maybe even if you could talk a little bit about how you're like whether and how these ideas around affect, and also like to a certain degree like the body as a continuous signifier or something like this, how signification of the body functions, especially in relation to these drug paintings, which seem to kind of have a direct link to the earlier tincture paintings as in relation, you know, in relationship to the concept of help or something like this, chemical help and harm.
Well, those paintings, I think, firstly, are more abstracted because I meant for them to be, those paintings are also sincere. I mean, all paintings are all sincere, but this painting, you know, more so the ECT painting that's next than than the ketamine painting. But they're like, those paintings are supposed to represent, I had a tough year last year, and that's all I'll say about that. So these paintings are connected to how I coped with that year. And I wanted to sort of signify the experience of getting these treatments. You know, on one hand, like this painting, for example, I don't, you know, electroconvulsive therapy isn't like a zap. It's not like a, you know, it's not like a cartoon zap. It's, you know, it's like much more physical than that. But I wanted to sort of simulate the idea that the body, in this painting, the body, you know, through the application of like an electrical current, which is, I guess, like expressed by those stars, like the electricity of a twinkling of a star was like a, you know, a zap of electricity. And then I like the idea of the body sort of being filled with new day, like I guess if depression and suicidality is, you know, the loss of the ability to see the future, like the zap of this painting filled the body with new days, like days upon days, that, you know, so that was sort of the symbolic power of that painting. And the planets were also just meant to, I think, I don't know, the sort of the magnitude of like the magnitude of redemption, I think, you know, is cosmic. Like if you can realign yourself with like the world in a way that allows you to continue living, that is like a, you know, a cosmic shift in personality. It's like a really big shift. You know, it's not small. I mean, and it's I think for people who have that experience, it's like a shift. It's like a world. It's a shift in the world. It's not, you know, it's not just like having a different kind of food for dinner. It's, you know, it's like it's, you know, and then the ketamine painting, I've gotten ketamine infusion treatments. It's like sort of an experimental, but now I think pretty recognized way of like treating depression. And this painting is a little bit more, I think, idiosyncratic. It's a really insane feeling having ketamine pumped through your veins. It's on one hand it's psychedelic, but it's also like really healing, and you can kind of feel it. Like you can feel. I think people would probably, I might like liken it to maybe the way people experience sort of therapeutic mushroom trips or ayahuasca trips, where the formal experience of the drug like helps you, like sort of symbolizes the healing process that you go through. Like the meaning of it and the experience of it are sort of the same. So in this painting, I wanted to illustrate the feeling of like a healing liquid sort of extinguishing like an external fire. And in those little stones that like in the sort of like globules between the body, those are actually if they're like whirlpools of droplets. You can't really see that far away, but they're actually all like droplets of water circulating. So I kind of thought of those as like a deluge of healing liquid. And then I'd also, this is sort of an anecdotal, but I have friends come with me just, you know, to like keep me company because it's kind of a scary experience. And we usually just like watch, you know, we'll watch like relaxing, you know, or sort of interesting videos, and I'll try to like stay a little bit tethered to reality. And we watched this K-pop music video called Fun by this band Promise. And in that video, there's a little scene where like a girl or woman gets splashed with water in a way where she's like experiencing, it seems like she's experiencing like ecstasy. And I guess to me, that experience, like watching her like get splashed with this healing liquid and having ecstasy, you know, an ecstatic experience, sort of, it was kind of what I was doing. So this painting, the body became, you know, just like a way of, a point of connection between this image and this process. And there, you know, and because of that, I quite intentionally used like the color palette of the photo. So the photo was the first thing, and then I wanted to have the body sort of like, you know, replicate. You know, I wanted the body to represent sort of, yeah. This painting's pretty simple. It's just like a physical experience illustrated. Mm-hmm. You know, and also in this painting, it demonstrates how like the image is really invaded our experience of like phenomenology, or just like a physical experience is now like so, yeah, you can't escape images. You know, if you think about like phenomenology, it's, you know, the original writings are so materialistic, you know, they're so like based on seeing a tree, you know, or like hearing music. And I don't even understand how they would have conceived of it if like, how do you like even phenomenologically experience like a screen grab from YouTube? It's really just, you know, warped our brains.
Yeah, totally. Although I do think that I can't help, especially as you were talking about that painting and the K-pop video, I kept thinking about the repeated images of the nuns with like the Sacred Heart being stabbed in the So Super Sorry painting, you know, and like how dependent the history of religious ecstasy has been precisely on devotional images and these kinds of images of the moment of rapture, or, you know, the moment of divine infusion or something like that.
Yeah. And in like religious, so when I was in graduate school for English, I took a theology class where we read a lot about that moment. We read a lot of like mystical literature, and it talked a lot about that moment of ecstasy as a moment of like a moment of coherence, you know. And this painting is not perhaps a good illustration of that, but I do like this painting. The usage of the nun figure was much more satirical. I liked in these paintings, the nun is like really overacting. And I wanted this painting was actually connected to a really specific experience of like wanting to fake apologize, go back in time and fake apologize to like a mean teacher. And so the nuns in this were supposed to represent like how you would perform like contrition in a really overwrought way. And they also mirrored formally the heart in the center. Like the way of extinguishing inner evil was by performing it like dramatically, and performing an emotion dramatically is a very gay thing. So it's sort of like triangulating being gay while offering an apology. You know, it's like you can't even apologize in a normal way. You have to like cry about it. Although I'm sure that many people don't act out apologies in that way, gay or not, or queer or not. But in the other paintings, I do think that that maybe the like religiosity or whatever of the other paintings, like the ECT painting, the moment of ecstasy is like a moment of kind of like coherence. And one of the things that I like about this painting was that like everything fits together perfectly, you know? And so like the moment of redemption is also a moment of balance and integration. And I think a lot of people, even in like the discourse of wellness, you know, and like self-help, we talk a lot about balance and like knowing yourself as the ultimate form of like, that's when you've achieved ultimate wellness, you know? So I do think, and that sort of, you know, that like ecstasy of being integrated and knowing yourself and not having any sort of like holes in your identity, you know, that like let out the air of happiness is, you know, I think that's like a trans historical thing. You know, everyone wants to be like integrated as like a self-fulfilled subject. And that's more of the earlier paintings, I think, reflect that.
Well, and then we just have one last question, and then I think we're gonna open it up to other people. But I guess the last question we had was, what are your book and movie recommendations?
Okay, that's a good. I wrote these down because I really wanted to. So the first one is that me and my boyfriend and some friends who we are like our pod, our don't cancel me, watched The Cell last night, which I think is a great movie. It's a really good, I don't know if any of you, it's a old movie from 2000 that has Jennifer Lopez in it, and she plays.
I have. It has really crazy like costumes.
Yeah, it has really beautiful costumes, and it's really singular. I don't think that we'll ever see a movie like that ever again. So I recommend that to anyone. It's a little violent and disturbing, but if you can stomach that, then I would recommend it. The two books that I read most recently that I thought were great were The Door by Magda Szabo, who's a Hungarian writer, and then this book, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by this Polish woman, Olga Tokarczuk. I don't actually know how to pronounce her name, but she won the Nobel Prize, so look her up. And that book, I bought that book because I love murder mysteries, and someone described it to me as like a eco-feminist murder mystery about a woman, an animal rights activist who's an astrologer. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. And then I started reading it, and it was that, but also, I thought it was like going to be thematically that, but then it turned into something, much more philosophically that. And then I looked her up and she had won the Nobel Prize, and I was like, oh, this explains why this book is amazing, and not just like a pop boiler. So I recommend that book to everyone. I recommend that everyone go look at the Patty Harrison, who's this comedian, just had a Twitter thread where she sort of attacked corporate virtue signaling. Just look up Patty Harrison vanilla wafers, and you'll see a really high level comedic performance on Twitter that I would recommend the movie Nine Women by Francois Ozon, which I think that movie's really has had a huge effect on the way that I see. It's like all about the performance of affect and the way that we sort of try to communicate affect through archetypes and drama, and it's comedic as well. I like that movie a lot. So those are my recommendations for now.
Okay.
And music, I always recommend Britney Spears. She was very relevant right now.
Yeah, free Britney.
Yeah, free Britney.
Thank you so much, Michael. This is such a treat for us, and so great to talk about your paintings. And before, I guess we can open it up, unless you have anything else that you want to say that you didn't get a chance to in the midst of all the questions. But if not, then we'll just wrap the formal part of this up and open up for more kind of casual conversation.
I want to say that and I don't think anyone is accusing me of this or possibly even thinking this, but I have given a lot of thought to like whether or not I'm being too flippant about like queer politics. I've taken a bit of an antagonistic attitude towards sort of mainstream queer politics. And I've been watching the miniseries It's a Sin, which talks about the AIDS crisis. And I remembered, I sometimes forget how much struggle and death and has gone into me being able to make fun of bougie gay guys, and that I have, I'm trying to like balance taking an antagonistic stance about queerness while respecting like the actually really dramatic history of it. So, I'm not that dialogue I'm having in my head, even if it's not being expressed in the paintings. And I would like to be able to have that dialogue in the work. But that's a really, it's a really complicated balance, because you want to be like funny and dangerous and incisive without being ahistorical or disrespectful,
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's a good goal though.
Yeah. I mean, I think even just having those questions in your head while you work allows you to talk about the work more thoughtfully. Even if you're taking a one-sided sort of stance on it, I think having questions in your head while you work forces you to reckon with, the drama, forces you to reckon with the larger questions anyway. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Yay.